I was told there were men in hazmat suits there quarantining the entire playa. Potentially, like many people were going to die. What was your experience on the ground?
I think we had the most insane party I've ever had. We partied, just like danced for 8 hours straight in one of our tents. If anything, I would say it became even more fun. He was in my camp.
He was at your camp?
Yeah. Didn't have Ebola.
Did not have Ebola. Welcome back to the pod. Today we've got special guest Liv Boeree, a former professional poker player, current host of the Win-Win Pod, and I guess you would say just ex-risk researcher, philanthropist, all-around fun person on Twitter. We met online a couple of years ago. Like all of my best, I think everyone here in this chat I met online first, pretty much. Maybe Brandon. No, I think Brandon I saw online before I met him. And we've got her on today. We're going to talk a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about the ADL versus Elon stuff. We're going to talk about the Times AI 100 list, but we're also going to talk about Burning Man. And Liv was there. I've been there. I went there years ago, back in 2015. I have a lot of thoughts on it, but that is where we're going to start because Liv, I was surprised to see, I think Monday when you tweeted, and I was shocked to see that you were alive. You had not gotten lost in the mud. You had not starved to death. You had not been eaten by giant fairy shrimp. You had not had your skin burned off by acid mud.
Didn't have Ebola.
Did not have Ebola, which was shocking to me because I was told that there were men in hazmat suits there quarantining the entire playa. What was your experience on the ground? First of all, is there any truth, like while you were gone, let's say Saturday morning, about Friday night, Saturday morning, a meme sort of flourished and it was multi-partisan. You know, you saw it on the right, you saw it on the left, you saw people in the media talking about it, you saw regular ass normie people talking about it. It was on like the regular local news, is kind of where it ended up by mid-weekend. And there was a sense that you guys were in the middle of an actual like sort of apocalypse level scenario. Potentially like many people were going to die. That was kind of what we were seeing. What was it like on the ground? And I'm wondering if there was any truth to any of that sort of leading up to the, I would say, like crazy misinformation hysteria.
Yeah, so from my perspective, yes, the city definitely ground to a halt in terms of you couldn't, the way people usually get around at Burning Man is via bike or on like an art car. Less than sort of 3% of people are walking. And you could not ride a bike on the mud. The mud is insanely, so it's usually on this like dusty playa, which is this very like baked hard, completely flat surface. But when it gets water added to it, it's like this like incredibly fine silt that turns into glue, for want of a better word. So it did ground the city to a halt. But in terms of like the atmosphere there, if anything, I would say it became even more fun because like the whole ethos of Burning Man is about like expecting the unexpected and, making the best of strange situations, which this certainly was. And most crucially, like you have to be as self-reliant as possible, but also bring excess, whether it's excess food, excess expertise, effort, and so on. And so people, just like turned up what they normally do, which is like making sure that everyone's okay and taking care of each other. So we couldn't go out and party like in the playa like you normally do. So we just had the most insane on the Friday night when the mud got absolutely like at its worst and the rain was coming down really heavily. I think we had like a couple of inches of rain. I think we had the most insane party I've ever had. We partied, just like danced for 8 hours straight in one of our tents. But friends like even hiked across playa. A friend of mine hiked over for like an hour and a half through the thick mud to get to the, she figured out we'd probably be partying and came over. So yes, the city ground to a halt in a conventional sense, but still Burning Man carried on. It was just like generally more localized and there was no one on bikes. And then in terms of like, was this, if the rain had continued for like 6 days, which would be such an unprecedented event, that'd be like a Four Sigma event, something like that, then maybe shit would start to get a bit real, because then genuinely people would start running out of supplies. But most people, what people don't seem to understand is that most people weren't planning on leaving till Monday anyway, Sunday or Monday. And this happened on Friday. So it wasn't like there was suddenly a shortage. One of the most astonishing things about Burning Man is that you get like 70 or 80,000 people together in incredibly dense, living, inhospitable conditions, whether it's rain or shine, for a week. And there's, all kinds of like altered minds and all sorts of stuff going on. And I have never in my 8 years going seen a single act of violence. Like not one. I've seen people bicker, sure, like tensions get a little frayed now and then, but like I feel safer in that city than I do in any city on earth, walking around as a woman and, walking around as anyone, and nothing in that regard changed. So it was, yes, the truth that was, and don't get me wrong, some media were actually quite accurate. They were like, yeah, like there's been a load of mud and so people can't really move around right now. And that was the extent of it. Those media did a great job, but there was so much hype given, like it's apocalyptic out there, diseases spreading, blah, blah, blah. And it was just all bullshit.
I think when the news started to break for the first time, it felt like a lot of people were talking about this who really had no sense of what Burning Man was, because your description of the rain and how people celebrated and it was just fun, and actually people saw it as a challenge, they wanted to meet it and whatnot. I think for people who have never been there or who really don't know anything about it, it could sound in maybe two different ways. One, like you're making that up, it couldn't possibly be like that. Or two, like you're being a little bit precious about like you like these sparkly, like perfect, like environmentally conscious people who are like do-gooders or whatever. But it just is actually facts. Like this is a group of people who are looking for, first of all, so many of these people are looking for an interesting challenge. And I remember before I went, this was a huge part of it that was drilled into me was, the preparation for this. You're going out there, the environment's actually quite extreme. Self-reliance is prized. People who are building shit, that's prized. When I first heard about it, I was in my early 20s. Burning Man is not like a music festival. I think people think of Burning Man and they're like, oh, people are out there doing drugs, dancing, and it's like Diplo is performing and whatnot, but there are no headliners. It's not even allowed. You don't have musicians like billing their performances or whatnot. Some go, like Diplo went to have fun and probably was performing in an art car or whatever, but
he was in my camp.
It was at your camp?
Yeah.
So, but he was not like, you're not like a starred, like billed guest or whatever. That's not what Burning Man is. No. Burning Man, I don't even know if you could say it's an art festival. It's a camp out. It's a very radical sort of subversive type thing that started 1986, beaches of San Francisco. The kind of first version of this were just people celebrating a solstice, the summer solstice. And they lit a giant sort of wooden man on fire. 20 people were there. This group, the Cacophony Society, this is a San Francisco area based group. They're sort of dedicated to like mischief making and interesting pranks, or they were super countercultural group. They were actually responsible for the first SantaCon. This is before it became like a frat boy thing. It was just John Law described it to me as, we got a bunch of Santas out on the Golden Gate Bridge to freak people out. And that's just like, wouldn't it be weird, he said, if you were driving down the Golden Gate Bridge and there were just 50 Santa Clauses standing there? That would be fucking weird. And it was, and that's how it started. And the idea was they took it to the desert, and this was going to be, from the beginning, it was a kind of synthesis of technology, of art. It was just like smart, strange, like hippie culture and punk culture coming together and doing something quite like radical, which was building a temporary city in the middle of the desert from nothing, and then disassembling it and vanishing without, leaving a trace. And that was what was compelling to me as a kid in my early 20s when I first heard about it, just because we can't build anything today, like at all in the real world. And so how could you build? And if you see some of these pictures of Burning Man structures and the actual layout of the city and the organization there, it is, like you said, it is a 70 or 80,000 person city. And that's just fucking cool. And the kind of people who are attracted to that tend to be a little equipped. They also tend to be kind of radical and crazy. And like, I was thinking, man, I bet it is really, really fucking fun right now, actually. I think everyone is going to look back on this, and this is going to be, their favorite Burning Man. First, because I want to talk about some of the reaction that was on social, but like, my take on, burning is that you've been there. I think you said you were there eight times now.
Yeah.
So you're way more into this than I am. Is that kind of roughly how you would describe Burning Man? What have I missed? Maybe the ethos that you could talk about, which I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about it is that basically it goes as hard as possible on like allowing for freedom as it can without falling completely into anarchy. And it's like a really like tough dance to have with any kind of society, right? It's like what is the minimum number of rules that you can have that maximize freedom without falling into complete chaos and anarchy? And it feels to me, at least for something of this size and in this environment, that they figured that out. They have basically 10 rules. They're not even rules, they're principles. I won't list them all, but like things like
inclusivity.
Inclusivity. Like everyone is welcome, whatever their creed, color, background, in beliefs, you name it. And it truly is diverse. That's the thing. People are like, oh, it's all hippies, or it's it's all rich people. No, like it is truly it tries as hard as it can to be as diverse as possible in the like highest sense of the term diversity as well. Like ideological diversity, because you mentioned a good point. Like there's a lot of like sort of like kumbaya hippie types, but there's also a bunch of like fuck your burn, fuck you, like salt of the earth, like proper punks who will come and like, you basically like fuck up your shit a little bit. And I love that. I love that tension between those two, those two sort of categories and everything in between. But then it's also stuff like radical self-reliance. Don't expect someone to get you out of trouble, even though probably someone will because people are kind. Don't expect to just leech off the community. Bring surplus so that you can help someone else out and someone else will help you out. There's no buying of anything. There's no bartering either. It's all done on gifting and surplus. So,
which is another, I want to just double click on that really quick, because this is the kind of thing, when I went to Burning Man, I really expected to hate everybody there. I was going because I thought the history was interesting and I wanted to see a temporary city. That idea was enough. And I just really wanted to see that. And I was convinced that I was going to go there and some asshole was going to be like, sorry, man, we don't believe in money here. And like, here's like a fucking soda. And like, you got to give me something. It was actually, it was uncomfortable for me for about a half a day, in which you're walking through the city and people are just handing you things like food, lunches, like whatever, free henna tattoos. Come in here and let's do a class on I was next to a science camp back then called the Phage, partly run by a friend of mine who's a molecular biologist or synthetic biologist. I'm sorry. And it's for real. People are bringing stuff to this experience just to give it to other people. And it's just, I can't explain how just it was nice. And I hate to sound like, it's like, I feel like I'm going to fuck up my brand over here by complimenting this kind of behavior, but like, it was like really quite beautiful. And everyone was primed for just interesting human connection with very, very strange, very, very radical people with lots of interesting ideas. It was an idea festival, I think, almost before all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would completely agree. And I mean, that's not to say that it doesn't come without tensions, like there are, one of the things it's sort of like, if you can like take the community in aggregate is trying to do is resist falling into any kind of monoculture, because I think that's part of the problem. When something becomes too kumbaya or too fuck your burn or whatever, then it doesn't work. And it's just like, it finds a way to like coexist with these tensions in a way that something like, online, Twitter does not. We fall into, for some reason, diversity makes us go into culture wars there. But in Burning Man, diversity literally makes people stronger. But anyway, where was it before? Like, these 10 principles. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to list them all. One of them is like, leave no trace. Don't leave trash, basically. Everything you bring in has to bring out. There is no one who's going to pick your trash up for you. What else? Decommodification. That's an important one. You touched on it. Basically, do not come to like pimp your company here. Like, that is one thing that everyone will slam down.
Even,
because it's actually,
and to a certain extent, like the commodification of self that you see on social media. By that I mean, selling yourself online. I'm taking lots of Instagram photos and I'm sharing them with the world, but really I want attention and I want to earn likes and faves and comments and things like this. you see that online, and I think that's the exposure that a lot of people have to Burning Man. It's just like this relentless, I think they're called like sparkle ponies on the playa, like who are just like in the showy outfits, and they're like, constant posts like live, laugh, loving my way through Burning Man or whatever, really frowned upon. Like you're not even supposed to have your camera out really at Burning Man. It's like very supposed to, like there are, like you said, there aren't many rules, but just culturally you feel this real strong resistance to it. And
I have to say, it's one I struggle with myself. Like for example, this year, it was the first time I ever did anything where I decided I was going to do 2 talks at it. And like my ego and I sort of like went back and forth, and it's like, aren't you now like self-promoting if you advertise that you're going to do these talks? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of am, so maybe I shouldn't. But then at the same time, like I know that I've got like the shit I want to talk about is like, it's like my existential risk stuff and so on, and it really matters. And I think the Burning Man community would benefit from it. So it's like, how do I navigate that? And like, and at the same time, like I do get a couple of sick photos on the playa. Like maybe I shouldn't post them, but like I want I want as many people to come and get to experience this experience. So how do you do that without like advertising it? And yeah, I don't know what the right path is there. And I've probably myself like fallen too much into like the like posting of pictures. It's interesting, but that's again, like it's part of this tension that we have to figure out how to navigate.
But all of this stuff, I want to, the strangeness of the event and the way that it sort of doesn't track ideologically to any one thing and yet does mean something in general, it makes it really hard to share with people who have not been there. And it makes it really hard to attack in a way that is coherent. Now, if you've not been there and you see the attacks, it doesn't really matter because you don't know that it's incoherent. But while you guys were there, what I saw, sort of stranger than the misinformation was, I don't want to say it's even strange at this point because I saw it with the submersible. We've seen this for a while. When people who are perceived to be better off in some way experience something calamitous, there is a very loud contingent of people online who want to celebrate. I feel like there was an almost like national holiday following the implosion of the submersible with nonstop, just hardcore socialists excited that billionaires died. This one was not quite so bad because I think one person died, which was framed as like, of course it was a disaster. Someone died. Someone dies almost every year. This is an 80,000 person city. Yeah. People die at Burning Man. People die at all sorts of festivals. It is sad. It's like people are doing drugs. They're dehydrated. Like things happen. Well, but,
like if you take any random sample of 80,000 people on Earth, statistically, it's not that unlikely that one of them dies during that time period, during 1 week. Like, that's part of life.
So the reaction though, you had right-wing people. So you had a lot of people on the right, the sort of trad right, let's say, who were looking at this and they were saying, and this is kind of maybe what you expect, and this is what you would have gotten 30 years ago. You have people looking at that and saying, here are these devil worshippers in this kind of Sodom and Gomorrah-esque bacchanalia. Of course, God is smiting them down. One, that's like a very brute, basic one. Two, I saw like a generational one, a lot of older Gen X people being like, these millennials have reached middle age and they want everyone to care about this, but it doesn't matter. It's not cool. And I'm like, has it ever been cool? Like, when has Burning Man ever really been a part of culture, even like mainstream, like subversive culture? It's kind of an outlier. But then three, you have your hard left, and they're like, these rich people, right? All of a sudden, Burning Man is 80,000 venture capitalists. Like if you were just on Twitter, that is sort of, you're like, it's pagan venture capitalists. That is the only two, that's what everyone there is. And that was the commonality with everyone. I guess there was one commonality was there's a perception that everyone at Burning Man is rich. Crazy, because the Burning Man for me cost less than a trip to Disney World. It is a tent that I stayed, a yurt, actually, cardboard covered in aluminum foil, food, water, some costumes, and a pass for my Jeep and a ticket, which is like $500 for the week, $550, I think, or something like that. So everyone's kind of coming down on this thing, like projecting the thing that they hate most ideologically in the world onto this event that really has nothing to do with it or them or even mainstream culture at all. It's its own sort of unique outlier. What do all of you guys, anyone jump in here, like Liv, what do you make of that projection, that weird thing that's happening where people are kind of throwing they're casting their enemies, so to speak, onto this thing. And then not only did they make up the person at Burning Man, they then made up an event that is hurting that person and then they celebrated it. I mean, that's a fucking crazy cycle right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's part of like this cultural sickness that we have, which is Schadenfreude. You know, it's wanting to feel pleasure at other people's misfortune, even though in this case, this wasn't even a misfortune.
They had to invent it.
They had to invent there was a misfortune, and then they invented whatever their personal like belief system is that would enable to point out what was wrong with it in the first place and why it shouldn't have existed. And frankly, you know, I don't know, maybe this is wishful thinking, but I'd like to actually think that this will make the event stronger, because the people who are able to like see through the nonsense will now be probably even more intrigued to go. And that's what I hope, you know, and more importantly, like the people who, because unfortunately not everyone can go every year, right? Like there is a hard cap of like 80,000. These core principles are so valid, like also valuable to society, and so much the antithesis of this, like, you know, not to, you know, coin a phrase, but like it's such a win-win environment where somehow like through adversity and like all these differences, like truly like it's like the sum of the whole is greater than the parts. And that's like the exact opposite of this like very win-lose mindset that seems to have pervaded the online world, and to an extent like the real world as well. Like this, you know, one of the most dangerous things we can have in the world is like a false sense of zero-sumness. Like there is plenty of scarcity out there, like don't get me wrong, and like, you know, there are truly win-lose dynamics that we have to figure out how to navigate. But what is even worse is when we falsely think something is win-lose when it's not. And Burning Man is, because it is such a like win-win environment, I think it's almost like there's like this like metaphysical entity that wants things to be like win-lose and hostile, that is like collectively using all of the like pathologies of all these like very different groups of people to like try and attack this thing that is threatening the like abundant reality of these Burning Man principles. That sounds very hippie-ish. I've probably still got a lot of it in my head, in my system, but it does make me sad. But honestly, I think it's going to just make the event better.
I wonder if you said they're very important principles, and I agree with you in context. I felt, I know I got so much out of the experience, even just honestly being off my phone for a week. Was a big part of that, being isolated from, being quarantined from the internet and being forced to just be with human beings for 7 days was very valuable. Back when I first started at Founders, it's like 2011, there was a guy, Luke Nosek, on the team. He was a big burner. And he also, I mean, I came in through the Seasetting Institute. So this was like the primordial goo that led to like, in terms of intellectual goo that led to, I guess, like the Charter Cities movement and things like this that we're seeing today. It's these people. It's all of these people who they want to build new places and new ways of doing things. And they're really experimental with community and whatnot. Luke, every time he would come back from Burning Man, would be like, man, like, how do we bring that back here? Like, what do we do here? Can you? Maybe you can't. I think about this because in the context of like Mars, which was a really compelling idea to me and still is for so many reasons, but it's a blank slate, right? Burning Man is sort of that. It's a desert. So, you know, it's really impressive that you can build so much, a city there in a week, or I guess there's planning before that, but most of the heavy lifting is done the week before, then it's gone. But maybe it's just, you need to be starting from nothing, and it needs to be temporary or what? I mean, how much of that can you bring into the real world?
Yeah, it's difficult because like the real world already has these like very like entrenched starting conditions. I don't know, like just operating from a principle of like kindness. That's one thing that I've found. I've got this like, I noticed like as soon as I sort of logged back online, like I was, and there was all this like just like it was like a wall of negativity that I'd become
it's vitriol, man.
Prior, like just like inoculated to, and just like, oh yeah, this is normal, and it like hit me. I was like, whoa, like this is actually what the online world is like. It doesn't.
I think that was because I just know like you're talking about the nicest, most open people ever who are too nice. I was the asshole, I feel, in that group, and the people were nice. They were just fucking nice. And so to see, especially on TikTok, just post after post after post of just hate. And it's not just for that, right? I'm on TikTok for work purposes. Okay, I'm on the Chinese spy app for a reason. I got to keep up with the kids. And it's like it's just as hateful as Twitter, if not more. It is, I don't even, hateful is maybe the wrong word. It's like hater. It's like, who can we be fucking mad at? Who can we tear down? You want to find some weird social justice reason for it. It's all just based on this, I think, what you said, this zero sum idea. There's a limited amount of things. And so we need to take people down or something.
Right. In order to change the world, you have to destroy first without, instead of building. It's like that. It's like destruction is the way to change, as opposed to
but I just feel that building. Yes, for sure. And it's like those people, they just want to burn shit down. And I think that I'm just tired of pretending that they don't. So, guys, last thoughts on Burning Man before we move on.
I've got a question for the two burners in the chat, Liv and Solana.
I would say I'm a burner. I was a guest. Happily, I will go back maybe one day.
You're a burner.
So do you two think that the internet vitriol tribal sort of orientation, or the Burning Man friendly anarchy orientation, is closer to the sort of human baseline? Like which one is closer to, like what if we took away the internet completely? Would the world be more like Burning Man, or would the world still be more like what we see on Twitter?
I have a quick answer and then I'm going to give it to Liv. But my sense is that it depends on what you mean by the world. When there's any group of people who have a lot in common ideologically, so Burning Man is a place where they're very different and diverse in lots of ways, but they're the same in one very important way, which is they're going to a place open. Like it's specifically, they know that it is an open place meant for this kind of freedom orientation and meeting lots of different kinds of people. People are really primed for that. So I think I think if you have the values going in, it's very natural to be, positive. I think when you have a collapse of values, there's a real struggle to regain that. And that is what is manifesting maybe as the vitriol.
Yeah, I would agree. The other thing I would say is what the internet does that no other form of human interaction, certainly not Burning Man does, is that it reduces the amount of information transfer going on between humans, right? By definition, I mean, this is as high fidelity as we get. We're talking through a video link and so on. We can see each other. We can see each other's facial expressions. We can hear the tone of voice and so on when we say stuff. We can hear the ums and the ahs. Even that, you're more likely to have an argument with a friend over a video call than you are probably face to face, because there's even more information going on when you're physically in you're able to touch someone. You can who knows what we can even smell, biochemically, all this kind of stuff. And especially through the written form, there is just such a wealth of information being lost in every interaction that it invariably reduces the human experience down to this singular, very collapsed state, which by definition is dehumanizing. And when you dehumanize someone, that's when you get the whack shit happen. The conflicts gather. We tend to become more tribal. We look for other ways because we can't physically reach out and hold someone's hand. We look for other means of connection, and it just gives space to this terrible tribalism to rise. So that's why it's a great question, because I go back and forth. I'm like, would we be better if the internet disappeared? And I don't know. I don't know the answer.
It's crazy that we're asking that. 10 years ago, that was an unthinkable question. But I find myself for the first time in my life actually having to sit with, there are downsides, obviously tremendous upsides, but it's not just this utopian, everyone wins, everything is better scenario. We're losing a lot because of the internet.
And I might make a lot of you mad at me for saying this, but I do think a big part of it is that we haven't figured out a model of capitalism that fits well with the internet. In many ways, yes, it's allowed, it's great. It's democratized the ability for people to build stuff and so on, which is fantastic. Capital gets spread out more, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, because again, measuring, a P&L, quarterly earnings report and these kind of things, they are a very monodimensional measure of whether something is good or not. did we hit our quarterly earnings report or whatever? It misses out all these other values. Like, a social media network it isn't optimizing for, are its users happy? It's optimizing for, are its users coming back and clicking refresh all the time? And those things are orthogonal, or if anything, they're actually anti-correlated. Like what makes someone keep coming back and clicking for more is actually probably, it seems to be more like things like outrage and negative emotions tend to create user engagement at present in the current setup on, for example, social media and mainstream media, than what is actually making people smarter, happier, wiser, kinder, etc. And so we need to figure out a way of measuring like success of like companies on the internet that isn't just simply like a narrow metric of like bottom line, or at least like we need to like internalize all these negative externalities into these
carbon credits, but for happiness or something.
Effectively, exactly, something like that. Yeah.
Wait,
awesome.
I want to know how Liv got out though. We have to get the did you see people having trouble getting out? Because that was a whole part of the narrative. They're never getting out. I saw some pictures. So
yeah,
on Twitter.
Anyone who tried to leave on either the Friday or the Saturday had troubles getting out, right? Because the mud was so thick. We were originally planning on leaving on Sunday or Monday. In the end, we decided to hike out on Sunday because our camp leader, it rained again on Sunday morning, and he was like, we were going to drive out with a friend in their RV, and our camp leader was like, look, anyone who is up for hiking out, I think I would prefer you to, because we don't know when the rain's going to stop. So if you're up to the walk and you can carry what carry as much as you can, then please make the hike out. So we decided to do that. In retrospect, I wish I'd stayed because the rain stopped. I wanted to like ride out with the people we rode in. But in the end, basically, unless you desperately needed to leave on Friday or Saturday, which, as I said, like 90+% of people don't leave till Sunday anyway, then you basically were like nothing had changed. But no, you couldn't easily leave. I saw like I saw RVs stuck in the mud, etc. People who tried to drive, if you didn't have a big chunky 4-wheel drive, you weren't getting out when the mud was thick.
And when you say you hiked out, you hiked was it like 5 miles to a road where they were picking
something
people
like
up?
that. Yeah, our camp was on like the furthest point from the.
You weren't actually with Diplo, were you?
No, he hiked out the day before.
Famous video is him and Chris Rock and a couple of people said that he got a private shuttle or something. He hiked like 5 miles to the road, and then a fan saw him and they gave him they rode him to town.
From what I understand, he had like a show he had to be at. That's the only reason why he was having the time of his life. And
he made it. He made his flight and he got to the show, and he is professional.
Yeah, that was the reason, because he had like a professional commitment he had to get out for. The only reason we left was because our camp lead was like, look, if you wouldn't mind, just because we don't know how long it's going to be, and at some point we will need to think about food. We were nowhere close to it. And camps, that's the thing, camps want to provide for those who are maybe in shortage, because, our camp did have plenty, and like maybe people in the area were starting, they might start to run low if the worst case happened, which it didn't. So yeah, and I mean, it was fun. I liked the experience of hiking out. Never done that before. But yeah, that part of me wishes, we had, had stayed on for even more days. Yeah, next year.
Maybe there'll be another flood. And the shrimp, last question, no fairy shrimp?
I wish. I love weird bugs. I didn't see any.
That's too bad, man. That was the one in a torrent of endless misinformation. That one came up and I'm like, I think that actually might be true. I think that there might be some fairy shrimp hatching from eggs. I kind of vaguely remember hearing about something like that when I was there, that this was like a potential, and but so far, no hard evidence. The photos I saw were from years prior. Okay, I want to move on. Speaking of capitalism, we got to get to Elon Musk. So our boy Elon decided very publicly that he was going to sue the Anti-Defamation League. This is a phenomenal story. So River's going to give a little context on the Anti-Defamation League in a moment, but very quickly I'll just say this is an NGO that has been going to Twitter's advertisers from the moment Twitter changed hands in an effort to have them leave the platform. The reason is because, and this is just one of many NGOs that have been participating in this kind of, I guess, activist effort. There is a perception among, let's just say it is the left, that Elon's, quote, free speech is bad for people. It is dangerous. It is going to lead, I think, the real reason, to a Trump victory. So there is an effort to punish him, and until he relents and caves in and adopts the same speech codes that Mark Zuckerberg has adopted and that Twitter had before he took over. I will say, just broadly, cross tech, there's been a thawing of that. Things are much better than they were 2 years ago, but we're also not deep in an election. And my sense is, as we get closer to the election, all of the companies are going to readopt the speech codes. And there's just a question of whether or not that will happen on, Twitter/X.com. So first, before we get into the ADL versus Elon drama and sort of what it means, the NGO stuff, some background on the Anti-Defamation League. River, go.
Yeah, so the ADL it's one of these organizations that's sort of seen as like an arbiter of acceptability. You can think of others. There's like GLAAD. They're like, for the gay people. You have the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you have the ADL, which is a Jewish civil rights organization, but they also monitor other types of hate, as they say. But I think the perception that this is sort of a benevolent civil rights organization is not really correct if you look at their history. In 1993, it came out that the ADL had spent the last 20 years spying on American citizens, all the way from sitting U.S. congressmen to college kids, for a variety of things, the most strange of which was people who opposed South African apartheid. So they were keeping files, like thousands of them, on all sorts of people who had attended anti-apartheid protests, had Congress people who had introduced legislation against, like sanctions legislation against South Africa, and they were selling this information to the South African government.
What is the reason? Because in general, it is just a group that, like you said, it's like the GLAAD, but for Jewish people. They go and police content to make sure that it's not, hateful to the Jewish people, I think, is kind of roughly how I would think.
That's the perception of what they do. I would argue that the ADL is very mercenary, and they have traditionally had a lot of connections to foreign governments. For example, Turkey. If you go to their website for their Courage to Care Award, you'll find that for 2000, and it goes from 2004 to 2006. It's missing 2005 because that's the year that they gave that award to Recep Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey. And since he's become a dictator, they've taken it off. He was also denied the Armenian genocide, which is like the standard position in Turkey. And in 2007, the ADL actually lobbied, some would say for legal reasons, I'm not going to say on behalf of the Turkish government, but some people might say that, to stop a congressional resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide. The fact that they lobbied against it is known. Their precise reasons are unknown, but people can draw their own conclusions. I think that some of it is, especially during the tenure of their old boss, Abraham Foxman, I think that it was political connections that he had abroad that was behind a lot of this. But I think there is something ideological about it, the sense that maybe, maybe somehow if we recognize the Armenian genocide, it takes away from, the Holocaust being this sort of unequivocal event that, nothing else can be compared to. I don't know.
I will say that it seems that there is broad contempt for the organization growing among Jewish, certainly writers online. Tablet has run this entire pretty robust series on all of the different ways in which the group has kind of lost, they're framing it as like lost its way. And that's kind of my read too, is that it used to be a group that did care really a lot about the Jewish image in American press, thinking that like this is going to lead in some way to violence. And maybe it did in certain places. Certainly before, but like it's certainly outside of America it has. But I think that was kind of roughly the thing, is like, let's control the image of Jewish people in America and like not be violent. And then now it's like just pretty much another left-wing NGO. At least that's the tablet read. There is this broader kind of NGO thing that I really want to talk about. The way that we're a country in which you have a right to say whatever you want. That's kind of a big part of America. I would say that is maybe the one thing that people kind of roughly agree on. They don't necessarily know what that means. And so they'll say things like hate speech needs to be illegal or whatever. But if you ask them how they think about free speech, they'll say they believe in it. They just define it in different ways now. That's a recent phenomenon. I think it's becoming less popular on the left. There have been times in the past where it's been a little bit less popular on the right. I think about the Virgin Mary paintings in New York City when I was a kid that were super subversive, and left-wing artists were creating these things. You had a lot of right-wing Christian people really mad about it. But in general, we're kind of bought into the rough idea. Legally, the government can't do anything about speech that people don't like. And so, internet comes along, social media comes along. Now everybody's speaking. A lot of people are saying things that other people don't like because everybody's saying something. How do you control that? It's like, what do you do? The platforms are going to have to do the censorship because the government will never do it. And the only way that you can make that happen is by pressuring them through their advertisers. And that's what we've seen from, the ADL most recently. This is specifically what Elon is charging them with. This is why he's suing them. Ironically, the Anti-Defamation League is being sued for defamation, potentially. We have to kind of follow the lawsuit. It's still kind of ongoing. And then we've talked previously about the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which is a sort of invented NGO that is ostensibly, researching hate speech online. Again, creating fake studies, sending them to the activist press that hates the concept of free speech right now online, under Elon specifically, and using that to scare away money and punish the platform. Elon's already said they are 60% down with American advertisers from where they were before he took over, all because of this. And it's a pretty big issue. This is a way that you create a de facto sort of censorship online. And it's, completely unelected power. It's, I think, a very huge problem.
Yeah, and they'll release statistics too. I can't remember if there's a Center for Digital Hate or the ADL that released these. I was reading them the other day. They're saying that, increased use of the N-word has risen by this much. Increased use of slurs against gay men have released this much. And I'm like, okay, well, I think a lot of that might also be people the only people I ever see post on Twitter are gay guys that I follow. So, and I mean, I'm glad to have been liberated to be able to use that word,
A friend of mine, I don't want to drag him into this right now. I said an acquaintance of mine, he's a writer, he's Jewish, and he said that he'd been seeing a lot more. He's a left-wing guy, so he's already sort of not into the Elon speech apparatus. He sort of credits Elon with a spike in anti-Semitism on Twitter. I don't know what anyone is talking about. I don't see this stuff. And I wonder if it's because I'm not clicking shit. The algorithm has become much more TikTok-like, I will say. The things that you look at or engage with even a little bit are pumped into your feed. I wonder if that's what's happening. I don't know. Liv, do you have what are you making of the speech question generally, maybe, or the algorithm or any of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky line to walk as well, because I mean, I actually have noticed, on my Burning Man post, I did notice one person made a comment on my partner who is Jewish, a negative comment. I was like, I've not seen that before. So I don't know, that's one data point, but at the same time, have I been looking for it? No. Do I engage with it ever? No. Although that said, I mean, I will actually go. I mean, I did go and click on that user because I was like, who the fuck is this? What the fuck is wrong with this person? So I don't know. It's incredibly hard to measure. That said, I hate the idea that anyone, whether it's an NGO, whether it's an individual who owns a platform or their team of so on, can control what is and what isn't speech. Is it allowable speech? Because I mean, I'm still reeling off the back of COVID, where just the degree of censorship around legitimate solutions to the problem was so insane, and there was such a like monoculture about what is allowed to be said. Like you couldn't discuss that, like the overuse of like the fact that they were forcing, mandating vaccines on young people where the risk benefit was very unclear whether vaccines were correct or not. And I say this as a vaccinated person, but like those. After seeing just how bad the censorship can go in an unhealthy direction, which then creates a backlash, which is even worse than the first thing, I come away from that going, okay, we shouldn't be controlling speech, but at the same time, there still somehow is genuine anti-Semitism out there, same as there is, so it's like, I just don't know.
I'm not denying, I definitely know that it exists, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know that it exists somewhere online. I just haven't been seeing it, and I agree with. This is, I think, what I'm reacting to is what you're reacting to, which is I know where they're trying to take this, and I don't want that. And I have to fight against that. It's specifically the guy in charge of the ADL is in a clip where he's defending the concept of speech controls, and he compares anti-vaxxers to anti-Semites. In the clip, he's rattling off the things that are just, beyond the pale. And it's like, see, this is what we're talking about. You're using things that we all agree are abhorrent, and then you're including things that we need to be able to debate. And of course, anti-vax, that word no longer means like I am opposed to all vaccines, which, by the way, even if you were, you should be allowed to talk about that. In my opinion, I'm not at all. Vax me up, but like you should be able to discuss that. They're talking about people who are opposed to vaccine mandates. COVID vaccine mandates. That is how the word was applied a couple of years ago. And we cannot live in a world where that is the stuff that's being banned. Is me saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to be forcibly vaccinated. That's terrifying to me. That is some authoritarian, like prison country shit. And we gotta resist it. And
once you go too hard to it, I feel like it also makes things worse for the people you're ostensibly trying to protect. Like, I mean, this is a little bit more of an extreme example, but Brazil recently passed or ruled, I guess a judge ruled that people can be thrown into jail for saying homophobic slurs. And I'm like, I can't imagine like a worse thing for gay people, because then you're turning just like casual homophobes into political prisoners, essentially. And so that's just like feeding power to the cause. And I think obviously, like there's certain things that you shouldn't be able to say online, but I think once you become overzealous, it gives the impression that there's like this vast conspiracy against, X group of like casual bigot or whatever that can then turn like, for instance, a casual anti-Semite or whatever into like a full-blown Nazi.
Right.
So
yeah, that's the thing. They don't think about the second order effects. They just pay attention to the thing, right? It's like the short term effect. Oh, this person said a bad thing. It's like, think about, if you turn someone who is mild into basically, as you say, like a political prisoner, the backlash is going to be so much worse, because then they're genuinely going to get people who are in the right now aligning with their cause. And that's even worse.
On the narrow gay example, we actually have data to support this in America, which is, for years, last, let's say 5 years, we've lived in a world that up until maybe a year ago was increasingly censorious on gay, lesbian, but really trans issues. And then the trans sort of censorship thing has had an impact on the entire rest of the alphabet, let's say. You just look at polling data on acceptance of things like gay relationships, gay marriage is down, gay relationships, the concept of like gay acceptance is down among all age groups, including young people. That is, for someone I grew up, it has only gotten better every single year of my life. It is really, really a big deal that it has gotten worse. Just like by the numbers has gotten worse. Like, I'm not saying I'm like scared to be, out there holding hands with my boyfriend. I'm saying that it is literally worse. We know that it's worse. We know that people's perceptions are worse. And how could they not be? My perception is worse. I look at this crazy shit that I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I'm mad. That makes me angry. I can totally empathize with where people are coming from, but there is a second order effect, and it is a bitch. But still, that having been said, it's like still not as scary to me as the medical stuff. And I think it's a huge problem. Of course, the media takes it as Elon's, I'm going to sue the ADL. The Los Angeles Times referred to that as the single most anti-Semitic comment by a public figure in 100 years. This is crazy because, as River pointed out in our Slack channel yesterday, Kanye West was out there supporting Adolf Hitler like a year ago. He was saying relatively nice things about
Alex Jones uncomfortable.
Making Alex Jones was like,
right.
Get out of here.
Also, Adolf Hitler genocided
wasn't Hitler in the last 100 years?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It
was.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he came to power until 33.
There was so much anti-Semitism before Hitler too. Like in the years leading up to Hitler, it was like Americans were all of America was anti-Semites.
Russian pogroms, the history of anti-Semitism is real and long, and like the fact that Elon's saying I'm going to sue the ADL, which Tablet Magazine is out here attacking every single day, is the most anti-Semitic thing that's ever been said. That's it's not crazy. It's predictable in an information war, which is what this is.
And because I think people just it's the same thing with like Black Lives Matter, right? It's when these organizations use such a good branding term that they become synonymous with the actual principle. And that's what people need to realize, is that these organizations are not. They might be aligned. Sometimes they could be, again, either orthogonal or completely anti-correlated. But they, it's like, how could you be against Black? Of course, Black Lives Matter. So you're against Black, you're now, if you criticize the organization Black Lives Matter, now all of a sudden you're a racist. It's like, no, I don't see that organization as the actual cause. Like, it's maybe that's what we should actually have a ban on. It's like, you are not allowed to name your organization after the principle itself. Or something like that. That would stop this.
If we could just create very strange speech rules, right? Like, free speech is gone, but we're not going to ban word. We're just going to have like the weirdest rules ever, and you have to kind of navigate that. I would be interested.
You have to put TM after it. You're like, are you talking about BLM TM or BLM the actual principle? Like, that's what people don't it's kind of this bait and switch thing that then these organizations do. It's like, oh, if you're against us, then you're against this cause. It's like, oh, fuck you. No, I'm not. I'm against what you're doing right now, but I actually agree with your cause. I don't know.
I think part of something about this is just very simple, which is the information war component of this that the media is engaged in. Of course, they're going to come after Elon. The LA Times is mad for a couple of reasons. One, they want money, and they see social media, generally speaking, as where the money is. This is what's leading to all the policy around the world that is forcing these companies to give publishers money. Two, the censorship stuff is a very popular opinion on the sort of press left right now, which dominates the entire media ecosystem. So they're going to go after him. They're going to say this. He is the biggest threat to them. Elon is the biggest threat to them and their cause of censorship online. He represents the first example we have of a huge tech guy over the last 5 years who's really strongly, and I would say to a certain extent successfully, resisted this push. Now, this brings me to this. Sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, that's it. I do think it is worth pointing out that I think Elon himself has too much power. He's just one person. He is far from perfect. And if he is not careful, he can go too far in a different direction.
Agreed.
And that itself is a problem that needs to be examined. So there is some truth to the general point. It's like, too much power in anyone's person's hands is a problem. How do we build our systems so that they are robust to the whims of mercurial people in general?
This is what Jack said when before Congress, his sort of second appearance, when he kind of reemerged as like a very polished looking wizard, and laid down. He was behind there was like the Bitcoin clock behind him, and he was like laying down sort of like freedom oriented principles one after another. He said someone was like, should we be able to stop you from publishing X, Y, or Z? And he said, no, you should not have. I don't believe that you should have that power. I don't believe anyone, myself included, should have that power. And I think that I think that Jack is the only person I've seen to publicly really grapple with this unique power that now exists in the world, and to fear and respect it. And I think he did the best that he could. And I think he really believed that Elon would be better than him. And Jack really believed that he failed in his use of that power over the course of especially the election. And it's a question that is, open-ended. This is going to get, I think things are going to get a lot worse during the election. It does bring us to the media, though, in the interesting way that they kind of just almost like transparently wage information war in the fucking cringiest ways ever. And this reminds me of the Time just released its AI, like 100 most influential people in AI list, artificial intelligence list. Liv, you seemed like you had some thoughts on that before we started filming. What is your take? Just like roughly, I saw, very lovely looking photo, all sorts of people, none of whom I recognize at all. I think there were like 5 that I recognized. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I guess I just have a general distaste for these lists in the first place, because it's like, who are the people at Time? And don't get me wrong, I think Time, I've been impressed with Time's general like platforming, particularly of the some of the saner arguments about like AI safety, or like let's call it AI awareness of risk that perhaps other places haven't been. That said, just like when these lists do have real life impact, when someone decides these are the most 100 influential people, and invariably they then miss people off or include people who just happen to be, who happen to have written a blog at the right time, Mark Andreessen, on the list that actually probably don't deserve to be on there. It's annoying because that then sets the tone for the next few years. They're the ones who are going to get called on to speak at conferences or whatever and whatever. So, again, it sort of like speaks to this problem of like, ultimately there is these like centralized powers that have real world impact, even though they don't necessarily have the chops to call that. And the thing that just annoyed me with this list is like there are people on there that probably shouldn't be, and there are a lot of people missed off who should be even in the top 10 and aren't included. And perhaps that's because they wanted to stay up below ground. I don't know. But yeah, it's just this like general idea that anyone knows how to rank people of something such as major as AI. And also how US-centric it is. There's like so many British people or like foreign people that aren't included that should be.
Well, I'm fine with the US-centric nature of it, but I think it's really crazy that Time thinks that they're the ones who are going to create this list. It's artificial intelligence is this for most of my memory, it was a niche, very tight-knit group of people working on something that most thought was science fiction and borderline sort of stupid. There are important people in that space. I, as someone who is definitely closer to it than Time Magazine, would never even dare be so arrogant as to think that I was going to list the most 100 important people in that group. It's crazy. I wouldn't even do that for something that I do myself, which is right. It's just like a tremendous arrogance. But as you mentioned, it does have an impact. This is what Time is attempting to do here. And they included some people who you would obviously have to include. Sam Altman is the one that comes to mind, right? You're running OpenAI. That's the most important AI company in the world.
Demis, I would say, is even, no. I'll put Demis above.
What was that you said?
Demis Hassabis.
So Demis of DeepMind is there as well. Incredibly obvious one, important one. Yes. But then what you do is you include people like Timnit Gebru. And the purpose of that, Timnit is who I've spoken about quite a lot. I wrote a piece about her called Robots Are Racist. You should check it out if you want the full deep dive on who this woman is. This is a woman who she does not work on AI. She's not an engineer to the best of my knowledge. Maybe she has a background in engineering. It's not what her job is now. She researches like AI safety, she calls it. AI ethics.
No. She would be mad at you for saying that. She researches AI ethics, which for some reason she doesn't like AI safety. Which makes no sense to me because
it's funny because I saw her go out
the same shit.
Calling her an AI ethicist. She's like, where did this come from? It's like, where does it come from? You talk about AI ethics all the time. But the point is, she is someone who believes genuinely, or I don't know about genuinely. I actually don't think genuinely. But her argument that is endlessly parodied in the press is that the people working on AI right now are genuinely interested in genocide. That these things are being built in such a way that they will lead inevitably to genocide. They're white supremacists. And it sounds crazy because it is a crazy thing to say out loud, but I promise you that this is her argument. Please check out the piece. I analyzed I watched her whole ass stupid talk on this thing. She really believes this. This is a person, this is what she does. This is a woman who was, she quit Google. She says that she was fired. She actually resigned and they accepted her resignation wisely. And that's that was her claim to fame. She worked at the place that didn't do really much at all, and got lapped by OpenAI. And now she wants a seat at the table to talk about how this stuff should be regulated, which is really crazy. Places like Time elevate voices like that as a weapon against the technology industry. And I know, Liv, you have very complicated views here, probably because you study X risk and you're super of the belief that this is going to kill us all. Potentially, no? Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like you probably are more into strong regulation, generally speaking. And maybe I just actually give you that. Take it. What do you kind of think about that right there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very almost bipolar on the topic of AI. Like some days, when I've been having conversations with people who are like more on the accelerationist side, but are actually thinking about the problems properly, I'm like, okay, we're actually going to be all right because these guys are thinking about this. And then I'll speak to ones who are pouring money in and literally don't understand the principles at all. For example, not to pick on him, but he blocks me on Twitter after I criticized him for a second. So I feel free to, is Mark Andreessen, who like completely missed the boat on AI and then writes one blog saying how, intelligence doesn't equal control. We shouldn't be worried about it. And like, he made arguments he clearly doesn't understand the concept at all, goes and gets put on the list. And it basically, right now there is the actual like race to develop AI is completely out of control. So that might be okay if we somehow figure out alignment in time to, as this wheel turns faster and faster, because that's the way it goes. The more progress is made, the faster it will get. But there is effectively no pause button right now. There's a lot of discussion of like how we could build one and so on, but it doesn't exist. So all the while it doesn't exist, and all the while that bad actors exist in the world, people who would use technologies for their own ends, then I think we are insufficiently prepared for the types of risks that are going to be emerging from AI. So that's why I would technically fall into the AI safety camp, in terms of I think that is more neglected than progress. That said, I think AI we need in many ways to solve some of our big coordination problems. Like
I'm glad to hear you say that. So I think to defend Mark for a second, I'm not going to defend the list because the list is like crazy. Like just clown world should not have happened. Like Control Alt Delete the list. Like get the list off the table. It's so bad. Mark is in. I think that he's in a place where he is experienced some of what I've experienced from AI safety people, which is just, I think maybe you were caught up in, I don't know what happened there, but I know what would happen with me. Like I'd become very sensitive to the AI safety people because they come after you like you're an idiot and like you've never thought of anything. And like they're the only people who've ever thought of this issue in the entire world, as if there are people working on this right now who are actually working on it, who don't agree with them. And I think it's very complicated. I understand that it's complicated. I think that there is something from Eliza Yudkowsky where I became more on the, not on the acceleration side, where I took a harder line on the safety people is when Eliza Yudkowsky came out and made that comment, did that interview where he made that comment about bombing the data centers, which I know we can quibble all day on the exact phrasing of that and what was really meant. But it's like, I don't want to ever be in a place where we're talking about bombing data centers. And I think that it's like, at that point, I thought it wasn't even the violence of the rhetoric. It was just the hysteria of the rhetoric and the kind of surreal nature of it. It didn't feel like we were grounded in a real conversation anymore. It felt like we were talking about science fiction. And I know that he was a science fiction writer. I'm a science fiction writer. That kind of stuff really bothers me. And probably what's happening there is people react. And I've had friends of mine, not you, but maybe you've been in my mentions on this issue actually, but even Jeffrey Fowler, another one who I like a lot, but like he comes in hard on this issue. It feels, I can see where a quick block maybe could come from there.
Well, okay, but I didn't. I just pointed out like these arguments make no sense. I didn't.
Did you say it like that?
Minor. I can pull up the exact tweet and you can share it. I don't know, but I was shocked that he blocked me because it wasn't. It was. Okay. Well, anyway, where to start? So I don't know. First of all, the Eliezer thing. I'm not here to defend Eliezer. I don't agree with some of his conclusions. I certainly don't agree with the methodology he uses to discuss some of these things. So I don't like that he is considered like the leader of AI safety, because it's wrong. I think there are far better, like someone like Connor Leahy, for example. Check out Connor Leahy. Go listen to his debate with George Hotz, which is one of the best things I've ever seen. Where it's like the steel man for the acceleration is the steel man for safety, and it goes back and forth. If people actually want to understand the tension of the issue, go watch that, because those are two brilliant people having a really good faith discussion and like truly. And, you know, I'll leave it up to you to decide who wins, who loses. Everyone wins. That's a classic win-win discussion. So, you know, I think, first of all, there's that. But that said, what annoys me about, like, people quoting, oh, Eliezer said we should be bombing data centers. He was talking, in the hypothetical. So there was that. Yes, he was. He was saying, if in an instance... Well, okay, let's say... i.e. some, Kim Jong-un has developed a pathogen that is as contagious as COVID and as deadly as Ebola. We might need to go and bomb his labs. Would you or would you not be in principle against that? Would you say, no, okay, no, there should be no bombing ever?
But Eliezer said he was talking about a treaty. If we have a treaty to not be doing AI research and someone breaks the treaty, you would have to bomb the data centers. That's not comparable to like a concrete actual,
because you don't think you can't.
Yes, if fucking Terminator evolved on an island and they were like, we can only stop it if we bomb it, that would have been a very different conversation than like, there are these nerds who refuse to listen to our international treaty, better kill them. That's like that. And you said you don't want to defend him, so I don't want to force you to defend him. But
No, but I will point out one thing, like, is that you did once upon a time, a few years ago, we had a little disagreement where you were like, I don't believe that these, AI safety people actually think that this is a genuine threat, because if it was, they would be talking about violence, and they're not. So now when they do go and talk about a thing of violence, you're now mocking them for that. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy.
No, Eliezer, I believe. So that changed. I believe that he believes it, but that doesn't mean that I justify the violence. I stand by what I said. Most of these people, I don't think really believe it. I think it's too abstract of a question. I do believe he does, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's like one of the smarter things that I've said. I was like, it's like very obviously you're all lying. I think it's a great argument. Like, why? But
they're clearly not lying. They're clearly not lying. And I mean, I don't know.
He's not. And now I'm like, great, they really believe it, and they have to be stopped, because I don't want to live in that world.
Okay, well, as long as you have really, really robust measures to be able to concretely know that you can stop.
No, I think the burden is on you to explain to me why I have to start bombing data centers. Like, I'm not the one who's recommending that.
I don't think I'm not recommending it either.
I'm just saying, like, he's got to come with better art. It's not on me to come up with all these weird, crazy arguments that can prove, for sure that he has to prove beyond reason that that people potentially need to die to stop this thing from happening.
And that's why I disagree with what he said. Because I think the error bars are way too high to ever justify, at least at present, to justify any major things. Which is why, from my perspective, I think we need to be talking more about, like, for example, even just having discussions about treaties, or at least having some kind of like sane measurement of when systems are starting to get so powerful that we may not be able to control them.
How do you regulate? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, when the issue with how effective would treaties be, really? Because I think it would be difficult to get actors who would potentially do the most destructive stuff, Russia, China, North Korea, like pariah states like North Korea, Iran, to sign on to these treaties. I mean, if Zimbabwe signs on, sure, whatever, but the Netherlands, but they're not going to do it anyway, probably. So I don't know how effective that would be if we're really worried about AI terrorism or whatever from, states.
Well, if nothing else, it would start it would create a norm of paying attention to when people are building these, because right now it's just anything goes. It's like really anything goes. Anyone who can, like, No one appreciates the dual use sufficiently, like.
So you want inspectors like
intuitively
nuclear inspectors that go into like Russia and have an inventory or like whatever.
Something like that. Yeah. Now, of course, they can defect, they can do all sorts of things, but right now we have nothing. We have literally nothing. Yeah. You know, this is like 1940. We've discovered how to split the atom.
What did we have in 1940?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We had nothing. We had nothing.
But
we
wasn't
discovered
that better?
this new. Huh?
Like you want it worked out for us actually to get to a place where we had the bomb and other people didn't. I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this question, but a lot of you always see when it comes to the question of international sort of sharing of information to be like on the question of safety and whatnot, it's always the countries that are behind that are really, really excited about this. And I think it's because they see this chance at getting more information. And I think they probably correctly perceive us to be in a kind of AI arms race at the moment. How do you think about that? There is an international piece that concerns me, like just a foreign policy thing.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a huge concern. I also think it's a huge concern that that like power becomes too centralized. That's also fucking terrifying. Like that's the thing. And it's not
version of the censorship conversation we were having, because now you're talking about this thing that controls everything.
Yeah.
This is also maybe why I keep shutting down, because I'm like, I do not see a medicine that is not really, really, really toxic in itself. This is Nick Bostrom in his book talks about his suggestions are chilling, they're authoritarian and dystopian. And I just don't want to live in that world. And so what am I supposed to choose between here?
Right, exactly. And it's Daniel Schwarzenberger calls it, I don't know if you've seen him, I did a long chat with him on like AI and this like Moloch problem. I always call it Moloch, there's basically like the arms race dynamic where like, well, if I don't do it, then those guys are going to do it, so I might as well do it anyway. Basically these like game theoretic drivers that like essentially makes everyone trapped in this situation where no one wants a bad thing to happen, but it ends up happening anyway because it's really hard to align. And he talks about this need for like some kind of third gravitational attractor, because right now we have these like seemingly two paths. We either go down the like completely decentralized, no rules, anarchy route, which will make, leave it like things open to bad actors. Again, like especially when you combine AI with synthetic biology, you're going to be seeing like pathogens we've never even imagined before. And like this becomes more and more democratized until like any idiot with basically a few $1,000s and a little lab they can build in their garage could, in theory, kill millions of people. Or in the other direction, you have more and more centralized control, which leaves us vulnerable to like tyranny forever. All of these are terrible options, and it seems like those are the only two. It's either one or the other. We need to, I don't know what it looks like, but some kind of like third like attractor that minimizes both risks and maximizes the best outcomes of those.
I think about Midjourney and all of this sort of, when I interviewed Grimes a while back, and she had just, like the day that I was interviewing her, the day before that, she was just getting off of this sort of, I want to call it, she referred to it as a hackathon. It was sort of like a dreamathon where she was working with Midjourney people to create different potential utopia images, like images of what a utopian society could actually look like. Which was very cool to me. The generative powers of AI, I think, are really interesting. Could we use the AI to help us conceive of a new safety AI order? Do we need the AI to help us solve the AI problem?
Yes, it seems like it. And that's the chicken and egg situation we're in. In many ways, like, I don't see a way for us to navigate all the like increasingly interrelated crises we have, like supply chain issues coming from climate change, which is coming from blah, 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 blah. We need AI to solve many of these, but at the same time, the more powerful of AI systems we build, the more potential there are for them to either fall into the wrong hands or, some kind of accident happen and so on. And Midjourney is an interesting example because it is like, it's such a, I don't know, it feels like David has like touched on something where it's like, I'm going to optimize for beauty. Yeah, as a shared value, and it's something that everyone seemingly like nods their head to. There's another project.
Such a good way of putting it. And it is so different. It's also funny that he's escaped most of the conversation about safety because it's not words. It's just like these beautiful, he's optimizing beauty.
And there's this other team who I've chatted to a little bit who are like, they had the idea of like getting as many people from, again, as many diverse backgrounds as possible to like to just like input little stories of meaningfulness, like moments in their life, in the last day or the last week or the last year that felt meaningful in a few hundred words. Write it down and add that to a database of basically like human meaning. And then maybe we can start training an AI on that data set. So it's not just the internet, which has everything from like really cool shit to like horrific Nazis and other stuff. No, let's do stuff on like what people, like these like uniquely human things that we feel meaningful, that like contains this like wisdom of humanity. And let's start trading it off that. I think they're going to call themselves Wise AI. That's feels directionally
which I love, and I think is really important, is that you're talking about curating groups, curating communities, curating ideas, and being intentional about what you want to build and create and things like this. It is to sort of tie back to an earlier concept in this conversation. We're talking about the incentives of social media and what it drives. It was so obvious in the AI safety conversation. Let's say, I think it was a handful of months ago, you had Gary Marcus's open letter that was published. I don't believe Eliezer Yudkowsky was on it. He might have been, but he then had that essay on, I think he was on it. And then he had his essay about the data centers and whatnot. Timnit Gebr goes after both of them. And I was surprised at first because I saw Gary and Eliezer as two of the most ferocious critics of this stuff out there. And she is one of them as well. They critique it in different ways, but they're both very, very, very aggressive in their sort of torrent attacks that they're throwing out there. And then it occurred to me that, and it was like, why isn't Timnit on the sort of open letter? Why isn't she signing her name to sort of do regulation and whatever? They're all in competition with each other for attention, and they all want the same thing. They all want to be. They're all on that list. I don't know if Gary Marcus made it, probably not, which is hilarious. But the other two are. They want to be in that like top 5. They want the attention. Our social media incentivizes this kind of behavior. And so of course they're saying extreme things, because how else are they going? Of course it's like bomb the data centers versus the AI genocide is coming on purpose. Sam Altman specifically wants to do it. And how insulting, by the way, to say that to a Jewish person. But that's the frame. They have to compete within that frame. And I think until we figure out...
I will point out that there's only one party in that group that you mentioned that's actually going after the others, whose name begins with T.
I think she's...
I was as shocked as you were. I was like, when they were... I mean, I guess because, to be fair, there is like a finite amount of like funding that can go into essentially, research or, sort of slow down dollars effectively, which is what they're all kind of calling for, right? Or, like let's slow this down, or like let's scrutinize this. There is a finite pool of that, and so if she sees like the sort of the existential risk concerned people getting a lot of dollars, then it means that the algorithmic bias people are getting less. I don't think that's strictly true. I mean, I think both areas all areas are horribly underfunded. Personally, I even think, and I can't stand her methods and the way she goes about it in such a zero-sum way, but I do think she just still has some kind of point that I think any bias that exists is, as systems become more powerful, is going to become more and more amplified until it does actually become a problem. So I think that should also be looked into. But the point is, it's not a competition. And like ultimately the race dynamic, this Moloch monster, is by far running the show and is so powerful. That's really what everyone needs to be talking about, and not even individual VCs or whoever.
Last question. Yeah. It's a difficult one, impossible almost. So if you guys don't have, and this is for everybody, how do you create a more curated experience online that allows for more productive conversations and art and collaboration and things like that? Because it does feel really hard. Like you're up against tidal forces here.
I don't know if you can, but I do think, personally, I think that a vast majority of like censorship has to go away. I don't think that if you go back to like even like early 2010s, you have Mark Zuckerberg saying like, I'm Jewish, but I'm going to allow Holocaust denial on Facebook because of like free speech. And it's like been totally memory hold. Like we are really not that far away from that sort of mindset dominating in tech and in social media. And I think that we have to go back to where, you know, unless someone is being like threatened in a very specific, like violent way, you kind of have to let the riffraff in, because eventually they'll tire themselves out is the thing. I believe. I think that too much curation might actually be the problem. I feel like once everything becomes incredibly curated. I mean, I guess it's fine for Instagram or whatever if you just want to look at like dogs or hot people or whatever all day. But if you want to if you're actually having conversations, I don't think curation is actually really something you should be looking for.
I just want to know why Time left off the most important person in AI. Like, unbelievable oversight. Ja Rule, they didn't put him on. I mean, we need his opinion on everything. He could have sorted this conversation out from the start. Liv and Solana would have been completely in alignment here if we just had Ja Rule.
Ja Rule has probably solved the alignment problem. His basement,
he's sitting on it somewhere. Yeah,
no one's asking. Someone just has to ask him. He's got it done.
Let's fund him. It's an interminable problem, it seems, but I think we need to think more about like this tyranny of metrics, where if you are optimizing for just one narrow thing, then you are leaving yourself vulnerable to basically being misaligned. You know, it's like we need to find a better way to capture all of the values, same as like, you know, like something like carbon credits and so on, to internalize the externalities of these like competitive, for-profit, competitive games that are going on between these companies that make us end up optimizing for things like outrage instead of joy, or, you know, black and white thinking instead of nuance. So anything that can like somehow encapsulate nuance and a wider band of metrics into the games that are going on online would be a good thing. How the fuck we do that, I have no idea.
Well, maybe on the next pod. Thank you guys thank you, Liv, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Brandon, again, I love to say this joke. I got to stop saying it eventually. You have no choice but to be here. Liv, I'll see you on the internet. Later, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.